Cartoon is an exaggerated drawing, and a cartoon for Michelangelo's creation of Adam may be humorous, and humor is so cleansing in our muddy world, or it may be depicted with an alarming poignancy. The delineation between a drawing and a cartoon is sometimes up to the interpreter. And cartoons have been around for a very long time, and there's an unfortunate continuity in some of the subject matters. So here's a cartoon by the brilliant English illustrator, Sir John Tenniel. It's commenting on Russia's defeat of the Ottoman Empire in the Russian-Turkish War of 1877. Sorry about that. The Russian bear and the corpse of Turkey is being watched by the double-headed eagle of Austro-Hungary, the British lion, the Prussian eagle, the French cockerel, and the Italian eagle. And this theme of Russian aggression continues from a cartoon from earlier this week on Tuesday, actually, which again shows the aggressive Russian bear menacingly approaching Sweden and Finland as they are interested in joining NATO. So cartoons, again, this one reminiscent of the work by Banksy, can make and often does political commentary. Social issues are also depicted in cartoons. I suspect the artist of this one is not a fan of Elon Musk and fears for the independence of Twitter. Healthcare cartoons again. With the rising cost of care, the best.
Shama,
yes.
Sorry to intrude here, but somebody is not muted and it's very distracting. There's family talking or whatever. Is that you?
No, it's not me. I don't seem to have control today of the mute. So if people would just mute themselves, I would do it otherwise, but somehow or the other today mute isn't working for everyone. So I would really again request everyone, please mute.
Yeah, this is hard.
It's difficult on my end to control this. I cannot control people from my end, unfortunately.
You can't? You can mute everyone.
I can't today. I don't know why something is wrong with this, so I can't mute. If people would just please mute yourself, it would be very helpful. Thank you. Thank you again. I'm so very sorry. Is this better? All right. Okay. I apologize again. Cartoons also deliver a public service message, that being that smoking is injurious to health. And this cartoon effectively communicates the detrimental effects on a girl's education due to lack of easy access to water. In many developing countries, girls spend hours walking for water instead of going to school. And a streamlined message against throwaway fast fashion, since the textile industry pollutes as much, if not more, than marine and air transport together. Cartoons may also be found on stamps and on album covers and CD covers, in this day and age, probably Spotify images. This one tells the journey of a character called Pink. The illustrator Scarf visualized his life as a twisted mix of elegance and horror, because the titular wall is a defensive warrior for the character Pink had constructed to close himself off from a cruel world. Album covers again, this time Kanye West's 2010 cover for his CD Graduation. And this is the work of the artist Takashi Murakami. And Murakami's 500 Arhats is spectacular. His show, Octopus Eats Its Own Leg, at the MCA of just a few years ago was fascinating. The cartoons were riveting with a can't look away gorgeousness. Cartoons and movies. 2007's Persepolis is a coming of age of a young girl in the pre-revolutionary Iran of the 1970s. She's the indulged, adored daughter of well-to-do secular leftists who campaigned ceaselessly against the Shah of Iran, but found family members harassed and imprisoned. It's a funny, deeply involving story that with bold, broad strokes and muted color tones illustrated the global social stabs that are enough to trigger rage. And this richly seductive graphic novel movie captures the sense of exile, the rejection of free thought, internal tumult, geopolitical upheaval, with hardly more than mere squiggles of facial expression. It truly is a cartoon masterpiece. Another one, an epic of Wagnerian scale. In fact, Wagnerian wabbits, Chuck Jones and Looney Tunes. What's opera, Doc? It was way ahead of its times, and its breathtaking brilliance was unrecognized when it first appeared. Try ignoring it now. Oh my God. Be way quiet. I am hunting rabbits. God, those lines are set to the score of Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries. And these master scratches of yo ho, they're wabbit twacks, and this frenzied stabbings of Elmer Fudd's demigod Siegfried. So imagine that cartoon voice shrieking with Wagnerian zeal to the tune, kill the wabbit, kill the wabbit. You have just got to see it. One weeps at the wit. So instead of the opera's original bewildering war cry, hoya to ho, our two-dimensional hero shrieks, yo ho to ho, yo ho to ho. You know, when you watch this, every delicious point, the mind lurches with magnificent uncertainty, as in like, oh, wait, is that what they said? Is that what I think it is? And yeah, it is, but it's much, much more. This helmeted midget is rescued by love, wait for it, arriving on a white steed, a rotund grain from the ring cycle, and love comes in the form of a bunny Brunhilde. I mean, the details are fabulous. It's much more than mere cartoon. The sheer due diligence of artistic details is jaw-dropping. So for exact body placement, the cartoonist studied the movements of ballet ruse dancers so that they could capture each impeccable limb placement of the wabbit. And again, please note the proscenium arches. I mean, operatic flourishes throughout stage setting, magnificent details. Forget this Saturday's Lucia de Damamor at the AMC 21. YouTube this, What's Opera Doc. You will weep with laughter. And though not the fiery Gotterdammerung ending, it cheekily ends with, it's an opera. Did you expect a happy ending? I mean, the more you look, just look at that conspiratorial glance of grain, sly look. The layers of satire are just divine. Can you imagine? A blue-eyed Aryan horse. It's far from caricature. This comic masterpiece, through respectful satire, ensconces Wagner's vainglory in a greater humorous narrative scope. It's marvelous. So Wagner again in the world of Japanese cartoons, Ponyo. This movie draws both the young and the adult, and this movie is a part of my children's childhood. And the cartoon's plot conceit, the flooding of the earth and the destruction that may be brought upon because of the imbalance of nature, is aligned with that of Wagner's Ring Cycle and its facsimile, Lord of the Rings. And in this movie, Ponyo, the central character is openly named Brunhilde, and they are parallel characters of Erda-like mother and a Wotan-like father. And here is Brunhilde, renamed Ponyo, riding the frolicking waves to the score of Die Walküre. I mean, I'm not joking. It's just marvelous. And so, we have operatic masterpieces in cinematic cartoons, and cartoons, or more aptly animation, in this case, of the human condition. It's an extraordinary portrait of an Afghan refugee by a Danish filmmaker. It was this year's Oscar contender, Flea. Therapy rendered via animation, which is also to protect the subject's identity, and not a consumption and escapism cinematic offering. This sketching is truly an elegy. The Danes have had a controversial history with cartoons, for in 2006, cartoons in Danish and Norwegian newspapers depicting the Prophet Muhammad in unflattering poses had triggered outrage among Muslims across the Middle East, and it had sparked protests, economic boycotts, and threats against the people, companies, and countries involved. Here is one example from the series of the cartoons that had been published. In this case, Muhammad standing on a cloud, greeting dead suicide bombers with, "Stop, stop, stop, we've run out of virgins," an allusion to the promised reward to martyrs. I understand the humor, but I also recognize, because since Islam forbids human depiction, one can understand the outrage of the Muslims, of the devout Muslims. Though satire should not become a discourse of hate, 2015's Charlie Hebdo murders were a result of reaction to cartoons. I would like to say it's an overreaction. Two French Muslim brothers had forced their way into the offices of the French weekly newspaper Charlie Hebdo in Paris and killed 12 people. So now Charlie Hebdo has had a long courted controversy with its attacks on all religions and all political leaders. So the reaction of the two brothers were condemned by massive worldwide protests. Je suis Charlie. I don't know if some of you remember. And again, with strokes of a pen or pencil, sadness through satire. Post 9/11, the starkness of line drawings, the simplicity of means combined with the effectiveness of the communication still sends chill down the spine. And I believe the French call it bande dessinée. It's their version of cartoons. France's reverence for cartoons had inspired the New Yorker magazine founder Harold Ross. Though the writing began to later dominate, the genesis of the singular Big Apple publication was the simple belief that images were more important than texts. Because sometimes words are simply superfluous. I mean, just look at it. And from humor, seriousness, if you read between the lines, this was the run-up to the 2008 election of Barack Obama. Bigotry and xenophobia, and this is during the times of the birther conspiracies, all of that invisible hue colored the perspectives shown here. Moving on to other New Yorker covers, Man, the Machine, Dukes Ex Machina. This in this case would be 2.0, where machine is the god. Technology solving all our problems, or purported to solve all our problems, and the subsuming religion of technology being alluded to here. And it's interesting to note the halo on the bottom right panel. So the revered Oak Park cartoonist Chris Ware's empathetic response to the lives of hospital staff during the COVID-19 crisis. If I remember right, the MCA had a show on Chris Ware's work. It's really, he has a devoted fan following, because a picture really can tell 1,000 words. And like texts, visual editors are crucial. And though not the focus for today, the impact of women, even historically, on the visual medium needs to be further delineated. Even the macho films of Martin Scorsese, ones like Raging Bull, have been edited by the female gaze and the female hand. In Scorsese's case, his editor for now over 50 years is Thelma Schoonmaker. And so this picture from the 1930s is showing Molly Slotz. She was the editor who governed the cartoonists, the artists at Tribune. Among others, on the far right, one sees Chester Gould, who was the cartoonist for Dick Tracy. And for the New Yorker magazine, it's Francois Mouly, who has been the art editor since 1993. And she has overseen more than 1,400 covers. It is she who attenuates the visuals. She did both of these It is a masterpiece of precision that reveals the essence of the story. The one on the right, Santa's 21st century reindeer team called Supply Chain. She also runs Toon Books, which publishes educational comics and works with schools and libraries to use comics as part of the curriculum. And I think that's really important because a lot of children have easy access to comics and then grow to really love reading books. It's quite a turnaround for the country, the US, whose Congress one identified comics as damaging and dangerous to young minds. As revealed in her name, Francois, she's obviously from France, her homeland had instilled a reverence for the power of bande dessinée to learn through engaging visual mediums. And the Nourishment Project firmly believes that beauty is at the heart of education. Here in the story of Orpheus, children very beautifully learn mythology. On the right are the three fates. The first fate, spinning the long threads of life. The second, determining the individual length. And the third, making the cut that signifies death. And as a child, it was cartoons that introduced me to the mythology and history of India. The series Amar Chitra Katha, Amar meaning eternal, Chitra, art, Katha, storytelling or stories. So Amar Chitra Katha effectively is eternal illustrated storytelling, cartoons. The linking of a culture through cartoons is not India's copyright. It's done throughout the world and it's undeniable in France. One of the most popular exports, beloved export of France is Asterix and Obelix. It's a global phenomena. I grew up with it. And it's so heartening that my son, the 10-year-old, for the last 2-3 years have been devouring the humor. And that laughter deepens with age. It's really brilliant wit. Tintin, again, global fan following. Tintin most likely fueled my love for the unknown, for lands far away. Geographically unfurled, Tintin's adventures transport the reader to destinations across the hemispheres. The 2D world depicted expands the reader's inner dimensions. The details of the 20th century cartoons are truly remarkable. Yellow Hat Buddhism, he did get the details right. Now I acknowledge that the original Tintin cartoons were full of racist tropes and were and remain deeply offensive. But one does better as one knows better, and Herge definitely improved and connected our world, making it more welcoming for the audience. And so now cartoons into uncharted territories. Simple lines tracing the contributions of the marginalized, both women and African-American women, to the frontier technologies of the space program of the 60s. So now garments are critical in space. As the human travels towards space, the air pressure decreases, detrimentally affecting the body because it gets harder and harder to take in oxygen, and eventually liquids like blood will start to boil. So pressure suits counteract this possibly fatal effect. Pressure suits served as an extra layer of protection within the spacecraft. And a leader in assembling the shell, the liner, the insulation was the African-American Hazel Fellows. Now let's re-examine the message succinctly communicated in that one cartoon. So the thought boxes, counterclockwise, reveal the perspectives of women and African-American, both minorities during the times of Neil Armstrong going to space. The poignancy that though the work of women, both white and African-American, have sown the world that keeps him alive, the protection that surrounds him, those women will not know the freedom that he experiences. One cartoon simultaneously communicating the perspectives of race, of gender. It's profoundly poignant. So the affront faced by women have been captured in text forms. Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale is just a recent example. So the author of this novel, burdened with depicting totalitarianism, is a fan of, as well a creator of, cartoons. You cannot imagine how funny she is. I mean, look at this. Winner of Man's Hooker Prize. Oh God, it's priceless. And her self-deprecating humor. I mean, look at that. Stoicism comes in handy, especially while you wait for the reviewer who gave you a bad review dies. And a whale of a storyteller, this cartoonist, Margaret Atwood. And she's not the only one. You know, Salman Rushdie, Umberto Eco, among many other literary stalwarts, they're all lovers. I think it's Gabriel Marquez also, the one who did 100 Years of Solitude. They're all lovers of the medium of cartoon as storytelling. And cartoons have long been telling stories, both factual and fiction, as early as the 1600s. For unfortunately, Charlie Hebdo was not the first case of cartoons proving fatal. In 1681, the cartoonist Stephen Coleridge was actually hung, drawn, and quartered for treasonous acts, including making prints that attacked the ruling elite. So Stephen Coleridge was a radical supporter of the Protestant cause in the late 1600s, when the whole of Europe was divided between powerful Protestant and Roman Catholic states. England was Protestant, but the next in line to the throne was the Catholic Duke of York. And here is Coleridge's depiction of the Catholic Duke of York as the half-devil, who, if he becomes King of England, caricatures Coleridge, would govern the Protestants by burning them alive, while the Pope and the Archbishop would push good Protestant clergy out of the Church of England. Them there were death wishes. He was hung, he died. So as we move on to the 18th century work of Thomas Rawlinson, who was a prolific artist of political satire and social observation, we realize in the background of this cartoon that the players sitting at a gambling table gasp as a man with his hand in the air drops dice. And you can see this in midair. There are numerous spectators standing around the table, and in the left foreground, a group of disgruntled losers gather by the fire. Now, Rawlinson, the reason I bring him up, has produced highly explicit erotica, cartoon erotica, for a private clientele. You can look up all of this. I didn't think I would show it here, but have a go. So this is the sort of entertainment that was available during Georgian England. And his fellow cartoonist, James Gilray, makes that world relatable to ours. Gilray, called the father of political cartoons, often satirized George III and Napoleon, among many other rulers. Here, Gilray's work caricatures the fear of patients who had been vaccinated from smallpox via cowpox. The patients were afraid that it would make them sprout cow-like appendages. You see, over there, over there. And I bring this up because cartoons do provide a continuity, as there is a fear of vaccines even now. Here, Gilray skewers the father and son royalty, George III and his son, who was for a middle gap called Prince Regent, who became George IV. The latter, the Prince Regent, is on the right, a rotund figure, and I'm going to point now, this half-length portrait above his head is of a man who had championed living to extreme old age through an ascetic diet. Well, he's obviously not following it. Yet on the left are the caricature of his parents, George III and his Queen Charlotte, and he's eating a poached egg while the Queen eats a salad. Now, we might appreciate that, so how healthy, but if you look at the title of the painting, Temperance, what this is depicting is miserliness, that George III is cheap. And by the way, George III's reputation in history is that he was a mad king. You know, there's a movie out, I think it's called The Royal Paint Box. It's on Amazon or something. If you have a chance to look at it, it's a documentary. George III was a brilliant artist. His architectural drawings are spectacular. Look it up. He's been painted in a very ill light. So James Gilray satirized his contemporary press's flattery of George III's wife, the Duchess Charlotte's dainty feet and elegant footwear. The press then loved that about her. He, through his artwork, depicted the physical grotesqueness by juxtaposing the 2 feet. And it stopped all future press flattery of Queen Charlotte's dainty feet. And Gilray's work has been reimagined into the 20th century as politicians abusing taxpayer dollars. Reinterpretation is a form of preservation. Political cartoons were enjoyed worldwide. In India, R.K. Lakshman began drawing cartoons 3 times a week with a panel of 3 cartoons on Sunday. So a practice which he stuck to for over almost 50 years. His signature common man, it's this little fella there, bald, bespectacled with a bulbous nose propped over a bristly mustache and with a permanent bewildered look as he observes Indian society. In this one, in response to the staggering cost of reconstruction due to weather damage, the caption quips, "But for the cyclone, we would never have known we were so rich," says the poor. It's really laden with humor. And again, there's the hapless common man just observing this comedic farce. Again, sublime satirization of third world corruption. It reads, "The reputation of this office is getting from bad to worse. That chap wants to know where to give the bribes." Keep in mind, as it's pointed out in the drawings, this is at the information desk of the Indian government. The corruption of India, still true. Keeping on, who needs Hazel Fellow's spacesuits for protection when you're the Indian common person? The ability of the average Indian to withstand calamity is put to efficient use. If he can survive without water, food, light, air, and shelter, he's ideal for space travel, impervious to nature's calamities. But from satirizing the conditions of a national psyche, we now move to cartoons that almost toppled a nation. So shots had been fired on March 16, 1914. This is pre-World War I. The shooter on the left was Henriette Caillou, the second wife of Joseph Caillou, who had been the Prime Minister of France from June 1911 to around January 1912. She believed her target, Gaston Calmette, the editor of Les Figaro, shown on the left, was about to expose the intimate secrets of her marriage. She had been the mistress prior to becoming the wife, and her husband was now carrying on with another love. So imagine a murder scandal involving practically the First Lady. Newspaper descriptions stated that, quotes, "From a muff linking the sleeves of a fur coat, the lady pulled an automatic pistol and fired. The editor, who was her target, sought cover beneath his desk. Witnesses heard a gap between the last 2 shots, suggesting she had pursued the man and shot him while he cowered under the desk. When I fired the first shot, I had only one thought at the moment: to aim low at the floor to cause a scandal," she said at her trial. The editor just happened to occupy the patch of floor where she pointed. And when asked, "And the other 5 shots, madame?" she answered nonchalantly, "They went off by themselves." That's what she had said. And if you think that's not enough, she was completely acquitted of murder. They just said it was a crime of passion. But it's this cartoon that captures the global intrigue about this case from even across the pond. Henrietta used to show up in the trials in gowns and ostrich feathers, theatrically dabbing her eyes and gasping for air at really opportune moments. Great scandal. I mean, look what it says in the cartoon. The theatrical manager from US saying 5,000 a week once when you're acquitted. And I love this one. Writer of newspaper sob story. She goes on to quip, "I'll describe her as young, beautiful, womanly, and devoted to her children, if she has any." So It's what these cartoons do, isn't it? Satire, society captured, boxed in. But caricatures often manage to highlight realities of society, though through exaggerated humor. Most of France was so distracted by the Caillou affair that the public was almost caught off guard when, on the same day that Henrietta was acquitted, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. With Serbia, that was the beginning of World War One. And so from World War One to World War Two, here is Sir Low's cartoon representing Europe's totalitarian leaders, Mussolini, Franco, and Stalin, as a singing group with Hitler waving the baton. And cartoons have managed to convey the horrors of unspeakable cruelty. Art Spiegelman's Mouse is just an example. And incidentally, Spiegelman is the husband of Francois Mouly, the New Yorker magazine's art director who was mentioned earlier. In times of World War II, emerged one of the greatest war artists, Ronald Searle. As a 21-year-old, he spent the entire war as a prisoner of the Japanese at Changi on Singapore Island, and then later as a forced laborer on the notorious Burma Railway in what was then Siam. The drawings he made while a prisoner of war managed to preserve and provide a unique record of a hellish experience. Prisoners queuing up for their rice, and this is in 1942. And in about 3-4 years, planes dropping pamphlets announcing the end of the war, 1945. And in that gap, through this artistry, one sees his transformation of his skills. Upon returning to England, Searle went on to illustrate the bitingly wicked St. Trinian series about a school populated by deliciously horrid girls. If you haven't read it, no matter what your age, you will weep with laughter. And this was followed by illustrations for the Molesworth series about prep school boys, equally treasured outputs. But one does notice the pattern of prisoner-like ambience in prep schools. Maybe there was a theme. And so Nigel Molesworthy, the seminal, almost simian qualities that he has. I just want to read one. And, this was written as a documentation of Nigel's thought, the fictional Nigel's thought. It is absolutely not politically correct by today's standards. So just simply accept them as not having been malicious in origins. In fact, the one that the bully Nigel mocks is clearly shown as being made of sterner stuff. So for example, and I hope you notice the charming spelling mistakes as I read. So this fictional character, Basil Fotherington Thomas, Nigel writes, I'm going to read now. As you see, he is skipping like a girly. He's utterly wet and a sissy. He reads Chatterbox and we suspect that he keeps dollies at home. Anyway, his favorite character is little Lord Fauntleroy. And when I say he has a face like a tomato, he replied, I forgive you, Molesworthy, for those uncouth words. You can almost sense the begrudging respect and envy of Nigel for the obvious ease of confidence in Basil. So Ronald Searle had also done reportage during the Nazi trials. For example, here, the trial for Eichmann. But World War II had an effect on American cartoons as well. In fact, Captain America debuted 9 months before America entered the theater of World War II. Here he is fighting Hitler, Captain America against Nazi oppression. 1938 Superman was the cartoon that set the whole cartoon ball rolling in America. And Superman too fought against the Nazi oppression, as shown on the right, as did in a few years Wonder Woman, as shown on the left. And the decidedly racist tropes were a sign of those times. And it's amusing to watch the arc of storytelling. When the Allies defeated the Nazis, Captain America went from fighting Nazis to smashing the communists. Look up here. from fighting Hitler, Captain America, commie smasher. Because cartoons reflect the mood and culture of the society. One amusing cultural effect in the impact of cartoons is, I don't think any of you will be able to guess this. Perhaps you will, who knows? Elvis Presley's signature hairstyle lock. That center lock was inspired by the hairstyle of the fictional cartoon character Captain Marvel Jr. Talk about life imitating art. So the success of Superman spawned copycats like Wonder Man, Shazam. Shazam is an acronym for a whole slew of mythological, mythological creatures like Solomon for wisdom, Hercules for strength, Atlas for stamina, Z is for Zeus for power, I guess, A is for Achilles, and M is for Mercury for speed. And so Shazam allowed every 12-year-old boy to dream that he too could meet a druid who would magically transform him into a superhero, that one didn't have to be born on a distant, powerful planet like Superman Kal-El to become a superhero. And Shazam was at one point even more successful than the comic Superman. American culture on full display through comics, because in comes litigation. DC Comics sued and won. Shazam was gone. And it's important to know it matters because it's economics, capitalism. The American dream is truly a part of cartoon culture. That 10-cent 1938 copy of the first comic book of Superman recently sold for $3.25 million in a private auction. One has even sold for more than $4 million. This is definitely not child's play. And comic characters have mythological origin stories. Superman flew in from some other planet. But ironically, very few are actually based on mythological figures. There are rare exceptions I'm going to point: Hercules, and you barely see him, and the Nordic Thor. You see him everywhere now. In the Avengers series, here is Thor again, and adjacent to Thor is the recognizable Incredible Hulk. Now look, notice the difference between this Hulk and how he was originally depicted. It's the color. It's the color gray. The green Hulk, he wasn't always green. The publishers of the cartoon were having trouble getting the right shade of gray in print, and so they just made him green. Fun fact. The Watchmen series is an incredibly successful cartoon. And I wondered if the title is connected with the Christian hymn, wake, awake, with tidings thrilling, the watchmen, all the air are filling, arise, Jerusalem, arise. Because I feel there's an underlying theme of deliverance in both the hymn and the Watchmen series, because this comic perpetually surprises. On the top right, you see the character named Ozymandias. That is not a common name like, see Dick Run or something. That name is laden with meaning. And it's writings of romanticism, of Percy Shelley, of history. And when one reads names like this, it alerts one to the creator's levels of education. And again, comics reflect society. The Fantastic Four series introduces the bickering, resentful, yet functional family. Fights within families, so understandable. And they are superhero, but they are a functioning family. The mother eventually turns out to be the most powerful figure. And through Fantastic Four, new characters are introduced, as was the case when a series got popular, they brought in new figures. Fantastic Four introduced the character Black Panther. Now, please notice in the original cover on the right, here's the Black Panther. And this on the left is the one that was eventually distributed. Because reflecting the times and the unfortunate societal norms, the publishers felt that the newsstands in the South, because that's where these comic books were sold, in the newsstands when you're buying candy and cigarette, Southern newsstands would not sell a black figure on the cover. Hence, the character became masked. The African-American skin tone was deliberately covered up. And it has remained so, voila, even when displayed front and center. Change does come, even if slowly. There was, I would like to point out, an independent Black comic culture in America, though, because all children like comics. But what I would also like to share are some of the less acknowledged societal themes portrayed through humor in cartoons. So the name Jay Jackson, and he's a very well-known, for those who follow this, African cartoonist of the early to mid 20th century. In his As Others See Us, he captures the racism that exists within minority society. I'm going to read that snippet on the bottom that says untouchable. Read along if you can, because it is tiny print. So it says, way down in the land of cotton, where your race can be forgotten, are a happy lot of critters living on corn pones and fritters. All are colored front to back, but some are light and some are black. And thereby hangs a sad, sad tale that makes me gnash my teeth and wail. The light, although they can't be white, won't treat the darker brother right. They put such value on the face. They form a race within a race. I'll bet our Nordic neighbors think they've found at last the missing link. You know, it's like uneasy laughter. But these prejudices are real, exists even within Asian hierarchy, definitely within the Indian communities, because cartoons bind tragedy with humor and somehow just pace the injustice. Cartoons were also cunningly used by colonialism to portray Africans as backwards, poor, cowering to imperial might. Whereas in reality, the countries in Africa were abundant with natural resources, including gold, diamond, all of it. Why else would empires try to conquer them, if not for greed? Images in vaulted London newspapers of uniformed, well-armed British soldiers contrasted with semi-naked Asante people in this case, propagated the belief that the Africans would welcome being civilized through colonization. Cartoon as propaganda, vast amounts of it is very well documented. The racial tropes one saw, and we'll see later, had a sinister purpose. Those clumsy looking drawings weren't the result of poor artistic abilities. Cartoons again reflect society, and the Green Lantern superhero here has been confronted by an African gentleman with the ills of racism. You can read up here. I've been reading about you. Now you work for the blue skins, and how on a planet someplace you helped out the orange skins, and you done considerable for the purple skins. Only their skin you never bothered with, the black skins. I want to know how come. Answer me that, Green Lantern. And the superhero hangs his head in shame and simply replies, I can't. Cartoons again address societal challenges. They address alcoholism, they address drug abuse, even the origin story of Spider-Man. When the boy, Peter Parker, first realized his power, he, like any normal child, used it to pose for camera and make money. You know, back then, Instagram versions. He had not wanted to get involved in stopping a burglar because he had been too self-involved to address injustice that surrounded him. The burglar he had allowed to get away went on to murder Peter Parker's uncle. And that instance made Peter Parker realize that we are all our brother's keeper. Hence the famous lines here, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. The reason I'm including this, among many reasons, is that incidentally, many of the creators of the cartoons, be it Superman, Batman, Shazam, were of Jewish origins. And I find it very telling that the brilliant tenet of Judaism, that I am my brother's keeper, comes out loudly and clearly in the art they nurtured. Speaking of Batman, so Superman's origin stories, I mean, he existed to protect the innocent. Batman, very, very human, existed to punish the wicked. There were clear separation in origin stories. And the artwork itself, look at the difference between the original artwork and what we now see as what is shown now. Look at the ambience. captured by pen and ink nowadays. The artwork itself is so, so striking. The Avengers, I mean, this is so funny. Look, then and now. And I love, even though this looks more fashionable, look at this. The humor of the artistry, invisible girl, nothing there. How clever. And to further illustrate the point, the comic Submariner, original illustrations. And look, if you juxtapose the work now, the artwork makes it so clear. Look at it, just amazing. And the ability, the sheer ability to use the pen or the pencil as a camera angle, the worm view, looking up at the looming godhead of Superman, the gloom and the despondency captured through colors. It's so atmospheric. And the paneling itself, the colors again, the unexpected softness of pastel, sometimes used to frame the violence, while in other cases, bold colors to really pack a punch. The size of the panels, the settings, the panorama shots, the colors, there is such incredible artistry and thought that is poured into every page. So it's not just a Roy Lichtenstein who needs to come to mind for masterpieces of what great cartoon needs to look like. And though outside our scope today, cartoon and animation movies are one of the most financially successful genres. And this is beyond the world of Mickey Mouse and Jungle Book, although they are some of my favorites. And you can guess, I loved the character of Kaa in Jungle Book, yes, man cub, let me look at you. And she goes on to slither, trust in me. It's just priceless. The silky, smooth thrill of snakes. Oh my God. But another societal aspect portrayed in cartoons is gender. 1940s Wonder Woman. She was the creation of William Marston, who believed that women were the superior race. Among many of Wonder Woman's superpower was her lasso of truth. If she put that on you, you were forced to tell the truth, not that one goes about lying. And here is a case of art imitating life, because Marston, the creator of the Wonder Woman series, was also the man who had invented the lie detector. Overlaps of interest. Another odd detail, actually a funny one, Wonder Woman was given a proclivity, being tied up, often by females. She's raised on an island of females, bondage scenes galore. And in the mid-20th century, critics of cartoon pounced on this and censors came alive. Cartoons promote homosexuality, screamed the 1950s. Why is Batman and Robin on the same bed? Yep, homosexuality again. The laments of comics ruin eyes, they promote violence, racism, unrealistic body images. Society and her fears affected cartoons and they self-censored. And now look at the difference, again, reflecting society. There are openly gay characters. Wonder Woman is alluded to being bisexual, and the character Loki, he likes them all. But openness is not only captured through superheroes. So these lovable Finnish hippopotami, looking things, I don't know if they are hippopotamus, these are my beloved Moomin trolls, who really gently embody self-acceptance. And you see all the comics I like, they're represented up there. I decided to use my shelf as a prop today. Just as an example, in the Moomin Troll, one panel, this little dog is ashamed that he only likes cats. That, he's not supposed to like cats, but he does. And it's like, so what, darling? It's okay. Like who you like. Moomin Troll's best friend, Snufkin. She's a wonder, I don't know, he or she, it's very hard to tell what gender, if at all, is a wandering vagabond who loves freedom and doesn't want to be tied down, while Moomin Troll can't seem to get enough of the friend's company. These are lessons worth learning. the central lesson that I love you as if bewitched. Yet at the same time, I remain in a profound calm and I'm not afraid of anything that life has in store for us. All of that shown gently with mesmerizing charm and delight. And time prevents us from delving into the universe of Japanese cartoons, which is manga. It's massive and just beautiful. As an example, Buso Renkin is about a teen who is killed in battle and later revived using a special talisman. Once resurrected, the main character fights to preserve the female alchemist who had saved him. And so the narrative expands into love about inner strength. And Kamisama Hajime Mashita, and the artwork is beautiful. It's really about a young girl who gets conferred the powers of a deity and goes to live in a temple with its fox guardian spirit. And the only reason I know of these because I make my children watch foreign films and I then get to sit and watch them too. And the story does get more complex. But the art of manga has made an impression on Western cartoons. The manga influence shown on the left for the Avengers series and the non-manga version on the right. I hope it has been conveyed that the visual medium of cartoons has effectively depicted issues of power, corruption, human rights, environment, inequality, societal concerns. And as this presentation draws towards a close, I'd like to turn your attention to a world masterpiece of illuminated manuscript, The Very Rich Hours of Duke de Berry. Now I'm going to point, here's the Duke seated on the right in blue, that color blue, signaling the exorbitantly priced ultramarine made from lapis lazuli. And these are like 15th century works. So the Duke is depicted exchanging New Year's gifts. The calendar goes on to document, that's what the entire calendar is about, a documentation of his wealth, the very rich hours of his life. One sees Sainte-Chapelle in the background, is the Duke's land and serfs in the foreground. He's master of it all. The wealth of wool, the wealth of textiles. Oh, such a rich life. The sport of the rich, falconry. His private hunting grounds, giving chase, winning over the prey, victory, he wins all. This calendar, one of the most famous and expensive treasured manuscripts ever, depicts his very rich life, the very rich hours of the Duke de Berry. In context of that, I humbly share the cartoon, The Very Rich Hours of Mrs. Mole. So again, Monica and Ronald Searle, the war correspondent who had done the illustrations for St. Trinian's, for Molesworth. I suppose he suffered from PTSD after his experience in the 20s as a prisoner of war. And when his children from his first marriage was in the teens, he had left his first wife and moved in with who became his second wife of almost 50 years, Monica. Within a few years of their meeting, Monica had been diagnosed with cancer. Though her prognosis was for only a few months, she lived another 40 years. During a painful 48 radiation treatments, Searle provided what only he could, cartoons. During renovation of their home in Provence, a cellar had been discovered, and this is while she was getting treatment. Hence, his Monica, his Mo, became Mrs. Mole. To have the courage to find love and hold on to it through thick and thin, here are the rich, rich hours of a life. The joy of reading by a fire, sharing and conviviality, the simple pleasures of a garden, appreciating nature, the glory of a sunrise, the luminous moon, to simply have tea, to be seen by another through grief-stricken, luminous eyes of shared living, love as a state of grace, that only God knows how much I love you. Which of these offerings is the cartoon, the caricature of what it means to truly live a life of rich hours? Which one? I wish you all the richness of the world. I wish you joy. Thank you for your time. I'm going to stop sharing now. All right.